Okay, welcome to the 111 Talks. So this is what I'm going to do for the next 5 minutes that I have. I'm going to try and look at my own relationships with change by looking at one particular case study in India, which is very recent. It's very raw, and it's slightly hurtful to a lot of us who have been involved in questions both of feminist activism as well as internet activism in the country. I'm inspired by this incredibly beautiful poem called 13 Ways of Looking at the Blackbird. And I'm trying to go and try and look at 4 ways of looking at change. The reasons why I want to look at these 4 different things is that I want to look at the method, the infrastructure, the process, and the intention of change that gets embedded in different kinds of narratives around notions of revolution, transformation, the need for change, and so on and so forth. Can I have the next slide, please? So in December 2012, and this is where my story kind of begins, apart from the 2 that I have laid out in the thought piece, is that I want to start looking at the notion of an ontology. It's a very, very sad word to use, but please excuse my academic betrayals. I need to use some reference points to make sure that I know what I'm speaking about. Very simply speaking, ontology refers to a moment of origin, right? When something actually happens. And let me tell you very briefly what happened in December 2012. A young woman on her way home from a movie, along with her male escort or a colleague in New Delhi, was on a bus. On that bus were 8 men who accosted the young woman, who beat up the male colleague, threw him out of the bus, and then went on to commit an extremely violent act of rape on this young woman. So much so, and they injured her so badly that she died of that thing in 2 weeks. And it's been kind of really, really scary because we already in India have a certain jaded attitude when it comes to questions of gender and safety on streets. New Delhi has often been recommended as a completely unsafe space for women to be alone outside in the evenings. But here was a young woman who had a male escort to protect her if something untoward happened, and she actually got raped and killed eventually in that moving public bus. So it led to a huge amount of uproar. I just want to mark the fact that that particular notion of change is actually a notion of change which says that while there was a demand for change that happened at that particular point, it was also a moment of change that was recognized, right? That change is not merely something that you demand, but change is a response to a change. That something kind of transforms, something new happens, a crisis emerges, and so you demand that a change kind of be put into place. The second relationship with change is actually one of teleology, which is more to say change's relationship with different infrastructures around us. In terms that, in this particular case, following the media reportage, there was an enormous outcry in the country about the inhumanity of the act. Right? A renewed recognition that our streets in the national capital are not safe, even for women traveling with male escorts, led to a demand for better governance, better policing, safer cities, more surveillance, efficient and vindictive justice to the perpetrators, etc. So what are the teleological relationships of change in these different kinds of demands? When we demand change, what exactly are we asking for? And what are the accepted processes that we fall back upon to recognize that a change is needed? It is a moment saying that we know something was wrong and that we also know that who needs to fix it for us. The need for change inspired thousands of people across the countries to come together in large groups on the streets, demanding that the government takes responsibility for this heinous act and that there is a speedy disbursement of justice which is necessary. Eventually, through all the cacophonic noises, there were 3 major demands that were made. The first, that people wanted vicious and violent punishments for the perpetrators of the rape. The death sentence was flagged. They wanted a speedy judicial process and wanted to kind of make examples of these men. The second, that people wanted better policing and protection in the public. More surveillance, physical and digital, neighborhood watch, community watch, tactics to be safe, etc. And the third was that people wanted harsher laws and a committee to recommend how to make better regulation to protect the interest of affected women. What are the change directions in this is the question that I want to ask, right? That where is it heading to? Why was there a clear distinction between people who do it and people who don't do it? And this being somebody else's responsibility. Why is most change geared towards demanding something from the powers to be? what is our own role in what is happening. And I want to examine this demand based notion of change that is inspired by a right to be safe in this particular instance. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the conditions of change in two ways, in terms of what were the conditions that led to the demand of change and what are the conditions which are being demanded by the demand for change. That what exactly are we talking about here? Is it possible to make a distinction, for instance, between change and transformation? Because all that outrage for 2 months of people coming in groups, the people being shot at, people like tear gassed and so on, led to a committee sitting on this particular case and coming up with a 184-page recommendation of what needs to be changed. The government looked at it and selectively applied it so that all it did was pass really, really mundane, gender neutral laws about safety and rape in the country. And, and eventually, after that, like in 6 weeks after this committee had already approved of these things, we still had a continued heinous repetition of similar rape activities in the country. It also led to the fact that in India, there is basically an idea that, just give me 30 seconds more, sorry. There's basically an idea that there are 12 reported cases of rape that happen every day. But they happen on women who belong to lower castes, lower classes, in rural societies, in unprivileged backgrounds, and they never become national spectacles. But when it happens to somebody who is like us, somebody who is young and suave and educated and lives in New Delhi, it suddenly becomes a concern which is going to start it. So I just want to kind of expand the horizons of change over the next 3 days and work on this particular case study.